everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. So it's been a while. Hi. I have not filmed a sit down video like this in at least 2 months. I think maybe the end of October or mid-October was the last time I filmed something in this setup. So hi, I feel like I need to introduce myself to you all once again, but we are here to film my favorite video of the year. I always love gushing about my favorite books that I read in any given year. This year I am doing the exact same kind of video that I did for 2023, where I have a top 10 favorite books of the year, and then I have 5 honorable mentions. Now the honorable mentions are in no particular order, but my top 10 are ranked. And I feel like this year it was especially agonizing and grueling for me to come up with my ranking, because my top 10, I feel like I love these 10 books pretty equally. So it really felt like I was splitting hairs in terms of what was my number 8 versus my number 7, for instance. So I am going to talk about my 5 honorable mentions first. Like I said, these are in no particular order. First book I want to talk about, I have not talked about on my channel at all because I somehow forgot to feature this in my last books I'm currently obsessed with video. I'll link that video up in the cards above. But this is How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. This is the only horror novel on this list and one of the few horror novels that I read in 2024. And I am pretty sure this is my favorite Grady Hendrix book that I have read so far. I've read 3. Yeah, 3 of his books so far, and there are just so many layers and complexities to this story. So on the surface, this is a story about Louise and her brother Mark. Their parents have recently passed away, and they are trying to deal with their parents' estates as well as the house that her parents lived in. Louise wants to sell it, Mark doesn't, and their mother was obsessed, and I mean obsessed, with dolls and puppets. And throughout the story, we see that these dolls and puppets may or may not come to life. So that is the story on the surface. However, while this book ended up being like all of my childhood nightmares come to life, it's also a stunning and beautiful exploration of grief, family, and love. Like, I actually cried at the end with the whole, I guess you could say, battle sequence of the main villain of the story. Like, it was just stunning, and it really got to me. I feel like this would be a really tough book to read if you have recently lost someone, so maybe, you know, be careful going into this, but I promise you this book will serve on the scares as well as the emotions. So the other 4 books that I have for my honorable mentions, I have physical copies of, so I'll go through these kind of quickly. We have Long Live Evil by Sarah Rees Brennan. This is an adult fantasy novel, book 1 in the Time of Iron series. What is crazy about this book is that while I was reading it, it was very much a 4-star reading experience. I did really enjoy my time in this book and in this world, but I found the pacing at times to be a bit slow. This is kind of a dense book as well. And just to give you a basic synopsis, this is about our main character, Ray. She lives in our world, but she is going through late stage cancer. She has been told that she only has a few months to live. Meanwhile, she has been reading this fantasy series known as the Time of Iron series with her sister. They have very much bonded over that. This mysterious woman shows up to the hospital while Ray is undergoing cancer treatments and tells her that if she goes into this other world, into the world of the Time of Iron series, she can find this object and save her life. And so she ends up in this fantasy world, but there is a twist. She is the villainess of the series, unfortunately, not the heroine. And so now she has to navigate this world, try not to get killed while she is in this world, get some allies on her side so she can find this object and save herself in the real world. So you may be asking yourself, why is this on this list if it was a 4-star book? The ending, period. Oh my God. First of all, to say I didn't expect that ending would be putting it very, very lightly. This ending has one of those plot twists that for me personally, like, just blew my brains out. I did not know what to do with myself while I was reading the ending. When I tell you I was screaming and yelling at this book, not because I was angry at the ending, but because I was just so surprised, and that like never happens. I am usually not so surprised by a plot twist that I'm like screaming. So that should tell you something. I am so much looking forward to book 2 of the series. By the way, there is a little bit of romance in here, and I was absolutely obsessed, and I need there to be more in book 2. Then we have another fantasy novel. This is actually a duet or a duology. I had to mention The Shepherd King Duet by Rachel Gillig. Book 1 is One Dark Window. Book 2 is Two Twisted Crowns. I love the vibes and the romances that take place in this duet. This is not a fantasy romance series though. It's more of a gothic fantasy with romantic subplots, but the romances in this series are everything. I'm absolutely obsessed. The world that this takes place in is just so eerie and creepy and so perfectly gothic. The magic system is really interesting. There are these provenance cards where each card has a different magical ability, and basically if you are in possession of the card, you get the magical ability that is associated with it. And I just loved the journey that our main character Elspeth went through in this book. Essentially, there is a monster living in her mind and things get really crazy and creepy. But like I said, the vibes are just immaculate, and I could not help but give both of these books 5 stars. So good. Next, I had to bring up Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. So I have read 4 Ali Hazelwood books this year, and I truly loved all of them, but I had to limit myself in this video and just pick one, and I knew that Love Theoretically was my favorite of the ones that I have read this year by Ali Hazelwood. So this is one of Ali Hazelwood's like classic contemporary romance novels where both the hero and heroine are working in STEM. Elsie actually works for a company where she fake dates men and they pay her to do so. And so at the beginning of this book, she is fake dating Jack, our hero's brother. There are other things going on that I don't want to get into, but what I love so much about this book is that Elsie, first of all, was just so relatable to me. How she refused to set boundaries for herself and to tell people what she really wanted. Like, that is so real. And also how she makes herself into different versions of herself depending on who she's interacting with. Like, I also do that. And Jack, our hero, is literally one of the most, if not the most emotionally intelligent heroes I have ever read about in a romance novel. And I just loved him so much. I loved how he encouraged Elsie to place boundaries for herself and to stand up for herself. And the way these two fall for each other is just everything. It is so good. Oh my God. And then my last honorable mention is Carrie SoDo is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Whenever I read a Taylor Jenkins Reid book, it's gonna end up on my favorites list. I am truly one of her biggest fans, and I have not read any book of hers that I have not at least given 4 stars. Most of them I've given 5 stars, and this one is no different. This is her most recent book, right? I think this came out a couple years ago. By the way, I'm so excited for her next release. I believe it's called Atmosphere, and it's sci-fi, like NASA related, and it sounds really good. But this is the story of Carrie SoDo. She is a tennis player, and she gets to the point at the height of her career where she is like the best female tennis player, but she ends up retiring when she's like 31, 32, which is a pretty normal age to retire from tennis from what I understand. So at the beginning of this book, Carrie SoDo is watching the 1994 US Open, where an up-and-coming tennis player is about to take over her record for most Grand Slam titles won. And so Carrie SoDo decides to make a comeback at the age of 37, which is unheard of. So this book was so incredible to me. First of all, I love Carrie SoDo. I love how flawed of and interesting of a character she is. And I feel like Taylor Jenkins Reid always nails that. Her main characters are just so interesting, so flawed, but you also can't help but root for them. Though I would argue Carrie SoDo is a harder character to root for because of her flaws. but she's also very relatable, especially if you are someone reading this who has dedicated their life to a sport or to some sort of art form. Me in particular, I have dedicated most of my life to music. I am a professional opera singer, but I also do musical theater gigs and things like that. And so I can definitely relate to this theme of like sacrificing everything else for like this one talent, this one passion that you have. Now we're gonna get to the actual top 10 here. I feel like I went on a little too long about those honorable mentions, but it is what it is. So top 10, let's get into it. Number 10 on this list is my favorite fan fiction that I read this year. Oh my god, this was so good. This is Wait and Hope by Might Be Writing. So this is a Dramini fanfic, or a Draco and Hermione fanfic from the world of Harry Potter. In this story, Hermione and Draco have been married for a couple of years. They have been together for about 6 years total. Hermione works in the Ministry of Magic, specifically with dark objects, like objects that have been imbued with dark magic. And so she encounters this one object that makes her pass out. And when she wakes up in the hospital, she realizes that she has forgotten the last 6 years. So she has forgotten the entirety of her and Draco's relationship. So when she wakes up and Draco is demanding to see her, she remembers him basically as the guy that bullied them at Hogwarts. This is a marriage in trouble, amnesia, second chance romance, and it was everything. I feel like this had the perfect amount of angst. It was the perfect length too. I would say this was about like 350 pages, something like that, which is pretty short when it comes to fan fiction. If you know fanfics like Manacled or Secrets and Masks that are like well over 1,500 pages, you will know what I'm talking about. But this was just perfect in every way. This just truly was the Dramini fanfic of my dreams. I could go on and on about it. So for number 9 on this list, I had to go with Not Another Love Song by Julie SoDo. This book took me by surprise. You will notice that quite a few of the books on this list are books that surprised me, and I love when books do that. I love when books subvert my expectations. Because I had read book 1 of this series called Forget Me Not. I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars, didn't absolutely love it. I went into this with not really high expectations either. However, I was very excited because, as you can see from the cover, this has to do with musicians. So we have our main character, Gwen, who is a professional and self-taught violinist. And then we have Xander here, who is a professional cellist. He is actually in this kind of like classical rock band. Like they play classical instruments, but they play covers of rock songs and things like that. But they both end up playing in the same orchestra together, but things don't start off all that well between the two of them, mainly because Xander is very critical of Gwen at first. He says some pretty cutting and insulting things to her, and so she despises him right back. When I tell you I was like giggling and kicking my feet with this book, because the whole first half they are just bantering and bickering whenever they're alone together, yet they do have an insane amount of chemistry. There is this one steamy scene, which is actually pictured here, kind of, that pretty much lives in my head rent-free. Like, it was so hot and intimate. I was here for it. And then when they start falling for each other, this book becomes so swoony and sweepingly romantic. And I just loved both of these characters separately, loved them together. Xander is so hot, love him, and Gwen is so relatable. And this book, a lot of it takes place in New York, and I just felt that magical feeling I feel when I am in New York when I was reading this book. So for number 8 on this list, I had to go with Happy Place by Emily Henry. This was another book that was quite a surprise for me. I have read Beach Read by Emily Henry. That's the only other book that I've read by her, and I honestly was not all that impressed. I gave it like 3 stars. It was not my favorite. I read it when it came out in 2020, and so from then on, I just kind of vowed to myself that I would never read another Emily Henry book again. I don't know, I thought that her writing was kind of basic. However, there are so many people in my life that have read and raved about this book, including one of my favorite authors, Sophie Lark. So I was like, okay. I gotta give this book a chance. I gotta give Emily Henry a second chance, and holy shit, I am so glad that I did. So there's basically two things going on in this book. This is a second chance romance between our two main characters, Harriet and Wynne, and this is also a story about friendship, as you can kind of tell from this cover. So every year, Harriet and her friends take this annual trip to somewhere in Maine, I believe. Like every summer they take this trip. However, these trips are about to end. This is going to be the last one because Sabrina, who I believe is pictured here, her family owns the cottage in Maine where they meet up, but her family is about to sell that cottage. And so they are meeting up for one last hurrah, one last friend vacay, right? And so this book is truly a love letter. I know I've said this a lot. Whenever I talk about this book, I always bring this up. But this book truly is a love letter to people who are in like their early 30s and beyond. People who have made insanely close friendships when they were in high school or in college and are trying to keep those friendships alive and healthy. And the way I related to this book so much, because I have two best friends. They are truly my best friends in the whole world. And one of them lives in New York now. One of them still lives in the area where I live, but it is just not as easy and convenient for us to get together and hang out. Especially because, like I said, one of us is not in the area anymore. And so I'm getting emotional talking about this. Like, I just related to this so much. I thought the writing was stunning. Leaps and bounds above what I remember beach read being. And yeah, like I just love this so much. And the second chance romance in here was amazing. I loved that we got time jumps of seeing Harriet and Wynne when they first get together. They end up getting engaged, actually, and how their relationship falls apart the first time, and then seeing them find their way back to each other during this one last trip. Like, stunning, absolutely beautiful. Someone is quoted on the back of this book as saying our generation's answer to Nora Ephron, and I feel like that is just so accurate. Ugh. Such a beautiful book. I definitely need to read more from Emily Henry, so please leave a comment down below if you want to tell me what your favorite Emily Henry book is. All right, so number 7 on this list is a book that I knew the second I started making this top 10 list, this book had to be included, and that is House of Flame and Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. First of all, I made an entire reading vlog dedicated to my experience with this book that I highly recommend watching. If you have read all of Sarah J. Maas's books though, there are lots of spoilers for all of the books in that vlog. So I will link that up in the cards above. Like, I am truly so proud of that video because of the discussions that I brought up surrounding this book and all things Sarah J. Maas, and like theories that I was coming up with and strategies and predictions, you know, all of the things. But because of that vlog and just because of this book in particular, like that is a reading experience that I feel like I may never forget. It was just so special, you know, making a video dedicated to this incredible book. I know a lot of people were disappointed by this book. Let me throw that out there. And let me tell you that I understand the criticisms that people bring up about this book. However, I don't agree with them. I loved this book. This is the 3rd book, by the way, in her Crescent City series, and I feel like I can't say anything about this book without spoiling it since it is the 3rd book of a series. But holy shit, this book was so amazing and so epic. Was it perfect? No. And it's also definitely not one of my top favorite Sarah J. Maas books, but like, this was just so amazing and so epic, and the last like 100 pages or so like broke my brain. I did not know what to do with myself when I finished this book. Just so good. And there are some characters in this series that have truly become some of my like top favorite SJM characters of all time. So following their journey in this book was everything, and I could go on and on. When it comes to Sarah J. Maas, I could go on for days and years. Number 6 on this list is truly one of my top favorite contemporary romances that I read this year, and this will probably come as no surprise to those of you that have followed me for a while, but that is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. Abby Jimenez has truly become one of my favorite authors at this point. I've given most of the books that I've read by her 5 stars. Her books just speak to me in a way that not many other books do, and this book is no exception. This is yet another Abby Jimenez book that I related to so much that I was a sobbing mess by the end. So we have our main characters, Emma and Justin. They bond over this like Reddit thread where they talk about their experiences where they will date someone, they will break up with that person, and then that person goes on to meet their soulmate. And so they are both ready to meet their true love, you know, meet the person they're going to settle down with for the rest of their lives. And so they decide to cancel out their curses that they will fake date each other so that they will hopefully go on to meet their soulmates, but they end up falling for each other. And typical with Abby Jimenez, a lot of her covers may look really happy and fun and bright, but the stories inside are anything but. Like, there definitely are lighter moments and comedic scenes and things like that, but this book gets very emotional because both Emma and Justin are dealing with basically family drama. And what I related to so much with this book is that Emma has what is known as avoidant attachment style, which is a style of how you relate to other people. And basically that is what comes between her relationship with Justin towards the end of the book. So I'm gonna read a section from Abby Jimenez's Q&A that she did at the end of this book because she words it so much better than I ever could. So she says, avoidance relationships tend to be superficial and fleeting because that's what they're comfortable with. It stems from childhood trauma, usually relating to an emotionally unavailable caretaker or unstable upbringing. They avoid emotional bonds and romantic relationships. They don't seek support from those around them, and they withdraw when someone tries to get to know them, which was honestly really difficult to write in a character as an author trying to tell a love story. And when I tell you, I felt so called out when I read that author's note. I just relate to Emma so much because of that. And like, ugh, that is so real. And I just thought that the way Abby wrote that into the story was just beautifully and masterfully done. And like I said, I cried like a little baby towards the end, and it was just everything. Also, Justin is perfect and we love him and we need to protect him at all costs. Okay, thanks, bye. Number 5 on this list is the one book in my top 10 that I don't physically own, which I definitely need to remedy because I got a gift card recently from Amazon. But that is going to be Tangled Wires by Lillian Lark. This is the first book that I've read by this author, and it definitely won't be my last. This was so unique, so epic, so emotional, but it's only like 200 pages. Like, how Lillian Lark was able to tell this story in so few pages, I will never understand, truly. So this is a sci-fi romance about Charlotte and Matthew, who is an android. He was created by Charlotte's father, and Charlotte's father decided to pass him off as human because he very much looks and behaves like a human. And he told the world that Matthew is Charlotte's like stepbrother, something like that. But they both work for this biomedical company, specifically Charlotte's father's biomedical company. So they run it together. And Charlotte has always had a very weird and strained relationship with Matthew because he is an android, and she just doesn't understand, like, how much can he truly feel? He's not human at the end of the day. So like, how much can she trust him, right? Meanwhile, as soon as we get in Matthew's POV, we understand that like he has loved her since he was created, and he is just obsessed with her. And so at the very beginning of this book, the two of them have a meeting, and Matthew just wants to bury the hatchet between them, and he just wants to be her friend. Of course, he wants more than friendship, but you know, Charlotte is definitely still coming to terms with what having any kind of relationship with Matthew would be like. And this book, it really is another one that took me by surprise. Like I said, it's only about 200 pages, but there is just so much emotion between these two characters. There is a lot of trauma. I do want to point out, content warning for suicide and suicide ideation. This book definitely gets very dark at times, but Matthew is just so in love and so devoted to Charlotte, and seeing her fall for him in turn was just everything. And let me just say, this book was insanely hot. Insanely, because Matthew gives like Cinna-Dom vibes. Like, yes, he's sweet to Charlotte, but when they are intimate with each other, he gets quite demanding, and it is just everything. And I loved this couple and this book so much that I actually went to Lillian Lark's newsletter and downloaded the bonus novella that she wrote for them, where they were celebrating their first Christmas together. That should definitely tell you something, because I know a lot of authors write like bonus scenes and things like that for different books that they write, but I usually don't go to the effort to read them. I usually don't care that much, but because I was so obsessed with these two, I had to read that novella. And by the way, I highly recommend that you do as well. All right, we have made it to my top 4 books that I have read this year. These are all books that made me cry like a baby, and all books that I feel pretty equally about, so just know that. But number 4 on this list is Hero by Claire Kent. I adore Claire Kent. I truly do. I feel like no one is writing romance quite like her, and this is my favorite series that I have read by her so far. It might be one of her only series now that I'm thinking about it, but this is her Kindled series, a post-apocalyptic romance series. So another sci-fi romance, now that I'm thinking about it. She does write a lot of sci-fi under the Claire Kent name. She also writes as Noelle Adams, but those are more contemporary romances. But this is the 4th book in this series, and at the very beginning of book 1, we see that a meteor has hit Earth and has completely messed up the ecosystem. Life as we know it is no more. And so by the time we've gotten to this book, it's been a few years since impact. And so we are seeing that there are like small little towns that have popped up. But for the most part, people are living on their own, and it is a pretty dangerous world to live in. So we have our main characters, Esther and Zed. So right after impact is where this book begins. We see that Zed had a girlfriend, and Zed's girlfriend had a daughter that they named Rena. But a few years after impact, we see that Zed's girlfriend and Rena's mother has since passed away. In fact, most of their friends and family have passed away, and so now Zed, Esther, and Rena are all that each other has. So Esther and Zed definitely have a strained relationship. I can't remember quite how they were related. It was like step something. So they're definitely not like blood related or anything, but it kind of a family friend type of thing, though the two of them have always kind of clashed. And so over the years, over the course of this novella, we see that the two of them just have this crazy tension and chemistry that they end up giving into, and the romance in this is truly everything. Claire Kent does an amazing job of writing her grumpy heroes. Zed is no exception to the rule, but her grumpy heroes are also incredibly sweet and loving. And there is this scene towards the end of the book that I will probably never forget as long as I live. It is basically a life or death situation, and Esther makes a decision that she hopes will save Zed and Rena. And when I tell you that I was a sobbing mess, like I was inconsolable. And we are talking about fictional characters, people that don't exist. And like, I was a sobbing mess, and I'm getting emotional talking about it, and it was just so beautiful. And then like seeing the aftermath of that and seeing how this book ended, like it was just so beautiful and perfect. And I can tell you right now, this is my favorite book of the series so far, which is a very big claim to make when I have truly been absolutely obsessed with every book that I've read in this series so far. Like, y'all just need to trust my recommendation and give Claire Kent a chance. If you have not yet, go ahead and start with either Last Light or Haven. You could start with either when it comes to this series. It's just amazing. So for number 3, we are going to talk about truly one of the most beautiful books that I read this year, and that is Wisteria by Adeline Grace. Can we just take a moment to appreciate this stunning cover. Oh my God, the covers for this series, immaculate. So this is book 3 in the Belladonna series. I read Belladonna and Foxglove last year. I actually featured Belladonna in my favorite books of 2023. However, Belladonna was in my honorable mentions. It didn't quite make my top 10. So given that this is my top 3 favorite book of the year, that should tell you how much more I loved this than book 1. This series is basically like paranormal, fantasy, historical, romance, all those things in one. And Belladonna is the romance between Cigna and Death. Foxglove is the book that bridges the 2 romances, and then Wisteria is the romance between Aris, who is known as Fate, and Blythe, who is Cigna's cousin. So I was excited going into this book because the way that Foxglove ended, I knew that this was gonna be a fun, like, marriage of convenience but also hate to love situation, and I was very, very excited for that. And for the whole first half of this book, I truly was just like giggling and kicking my feet because the way that Blythe and Aris bicker and banter was just so entertaining. However, once the 2 of them start falling for each other, that is truly where this book shines. This romance truly surprised me and blew me away, and it even made me emotional because towards the very end, like, some very heart-wrenching and heartbreaking things are happening, but by the end it is all worth it, and it is just honestly one of the most beautiful endings that I have read in a long time. I just did not expect this book. And I am so glad that Adeline Grace not only wrote this series, but wrote this book. Like, it is just truly one of my favorites now. And this series just combines like everything that I love in fiction. This is technically young adult. It feels a little bit new adult to me just because the characters feel a little bit older. But you have the historical romance vibe. You have the gothic and paranormal and fantastical vibes. Like, just truly everything I love in books. And if you are one of those people, because I know there's a lot of people out there that read book 2, didn't like it, and so they gave up on the series, trust my recommendation and read this book anyway. So my top 2 for 2024 are some of my favorite fantasy books that I have ever read, and let's just go ahead and dive on into number 2, which is the entire War of Lost Hearts trilogy by Carissa Broadbent. So I read this series all the way back at the beginning of the year, January through March, because I was reading a book per month. And the fact that this series has stuck with me throughout the entirety of 2024 should tell you something. And I have come to the conclusion that Carissa Broadbent is just as amazing, if not even like a better writer than Sarah J. Maas. That is how much I was truly blown away by the talent that Carissa Broadbent has to write this incredible trilogy. So we are following Tasana. She is a slave at the beginning of this book, the beginning of this series. She is trying to buy her freedom. The man who owns her makes it clear that he is never going to let her buy her freedom, so she accidentally kills him when her magic manifests. And so her goal is to find the Orders. This is an organization of magic wielders. She is hoping that she can join their ranks and get them to help her help the other people that have been enslaved from the country that she comes from. And so she ends up getting paired up with a mentor who is Max, who is our hero of the story, to help her develop her magical abilities. This romance truly is the spotlight of this series, though what I will say, I think this series is more romantic fantasy than fantasy romance, because I wouldn't say that the romance is the main plot. There's definitely other things like in the fantasy and war related plot that take more of a front seat, but this romance still shines just enough, and it is absolutely beautiful because it starts out as Max is a reluctant mentor to Tasana, and then they become friends, and this friends to lovers romance is just top tier. Like truly, truly, truly one of my favorite friends to lovers romances I have ever read. And then books 2 and 3 just get insanely epic in terms of the fantasy and war related plot, and like this trilogy just broke my brain. I know I've said that about other books on this countdown, but like I just did not expect the level of like world building and epicness that this series serves, and now I am just so excited to read more from Carissa Broadbent. I'm definitely savoring her other books because she doesn't have that many more books on her backlist, but I am very excited to dive into her Crowns of Nyaxia series as well as some other books that she has on her backlist. But this was stunning. Also, the art on this cover is everything. All right. My top favorite book of the year. Whoo! This book. Yet another book that really surprised me, really blew me away in just like the best way possible, and that is Emerald Blaze by Ilona Andrews. This is book 5 in their Hidden Legacy series, which is an insanely epic and amazing urban fantasy romance series. So this series is broken up into 2 trilogies. In this second trilogy of the series, we are following Catalina, who is the sister of the heroine from the first 3 books, and then Alessandro, who is her love interest. So this takes place in a world where there was this Osiris serum that was developed in the 1800s. Some people were injected with it and developed magical abilities of different kinds, and so through the generations we are now in like present day Houston, Texas, but like a parallel universe, obviously, where magic exists. But now there are all of these houses of families that have different magical abilities and different like levels of abilities. Some are more powerful than others. And Catalina has taken over basically as the leader of her family. She also runs this private investigation firm. So basically, when it comes to Catalina and Alessandro, in previous books, they had this amazing connection with each other. Catalina found herself falling for Alessandro, and basically because of reasons, he ends up rejecting her. That's definitely like simplifying what happened between the 2 of them, but now Catalina is definitely very hurt, and now she swears that she would never give Alessandro another chance, but things are complicated because they keep having to work together. Like in the first book of their trilogy, Sapphire Flames, like there was this murder mystery going on that he had connections with, so they had to work together. And now in this second book of their trilogy, they are working together because this plot is absolutely insane, but basically there is like this sentient, like almost alien being that has like taken over this area of Houston, and like that plot alone was just absolute insanity and just blew me away, and I was absolutely obsessed. But then you combine that with this amazing romance, like how these 2 come back together, because there is this one scene in particular where Catalina is just so upset over something that had happened earlier that day, and her and Alessandro are not in a good place, but she texts him because she just feels like she doesn't have anybody else in her life, and he immediately comes to her aid and comforts her, and then they confess their feelings for one another, and they're fully intimate with each other. Like this is their like big love scene of the book, and it made me cry. Straight up made me cry. I don't think I've ever cried during a sex scene, but like it was so stunning and beautiful, and the emotion between these 2, the devotion between these 2, oh my god. And Catalina is just such a badass character, an amazing main character to follow, and Alessandro is equally badass, but he truly respects Catalina for who she is and her abilities, and they just end up being an iconic power couple, and it's absolutely everything. And this book is definitely my favorite of the series, though I have given every book in this series 5 stars. It is truly just a top tier series that if you have not read yet, like truly, what are you doing? Of all the books on this list, This series needs to go on your TBR for sure. So that is going to be it for my top 10 books plus some honorable mentions that I read this year in 2024. I read a total of 178 books this year. Not as many as I would have liked, but still a decent number for me personally. So if you made it this far in the video, thank you so much for watching. I would love it if you would leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of these books that I brought up in this video. If you want to give recommendations for myself or for others that are watching, that would be amazing as well. I would also love it if you would leave a like and subscribe, and I thank you so much in advance if you do, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!